Okay, so let me do a very quick intro into what we're trying to do on those salons. The purpose of the Foresight Sanity Preserver Salons, it's basically a twice a day online salon. It's free, it's accessible to everyone, and it should really be shared with everyone, because I think the topics that we're discussing are threefold. One is that we're trying to create community for folks that are currently isolating, and that I think would benefit a lot from just like having a group where we can like pretty informally get together. Secondly, a little bit more ambitious, is we're trying to make sense of the COVID-19 crisis, and we're trying to surface projects that are in need of support right now, and we're trying to surface people that could kind of like let's say empower others to take the right actions. And then thirdly, a little bit more ambitious even still, and we're trying to leverage the current crisis for like long-term change and toward the long-term benefit of life. So those are the three purposes, and the salons do either or some do all of the three really. And I'm going to share a little bit about how you can join those salons in a second in the group chat for everyone. But I think, you know, to get us going as soon as possible, the quote that that really best describes the salon is: "Only a crisis, actual or perceived, produces real change. When that crisis occurs, the actions that are taken depend on the ideas that are lying around." So the purpose of those salons is definitely to pick up those ideas. I'm super honored to have Dekai join us from Hong Kong, and Dekai has been really at the center of many of our efforts at Foresight. He's been a really much loved speaker, participant, and session leader for a lot of our events, both private and public. And it's really a tremendous joy to see you again in person. And we saw each other the last time on Friday, which was for an AI strategy meeting, and at which point Dekai in a breakout group, or even in a break, started talking and sharing a little bit about what's going on in Hong Kong, what he's personally doing, what efforts he's launched. And it struck me that really he is coming from the future for many of us. So because we are about to face a lot of at least parallels to the lessons that Hong Kong and Asia had to learn. So I'm super glad that we have you from the future here. You have an incredibly extensive bio, which I'm going to share in the group chat for anyone that would like to follow up. But I would love to maybe have you say a few words and how your efforts have pivoted given the COVID crisis, then maybe show the video that you want to show, and take it away from here. And I will only be interrupting to take questions later. But the stage is yours. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you very much. I'm pleased to be, sort of having to stimulate a discussion about what's been going on in Hong Kong. I think it's widespread knowledge that we were one of the first hit, and so in many ways we're like 2 months or so ahead of the timeline that most of you are probably facing. I can share a lot about personal experiences here. I have on normal times, I actually alternate weekly, a week in Hong Kong where I'm a professor of AI in Hong Kong. But at the same time, the alternate weeks I spend at Berkeley, where I'm still at the research institute that I was brought in from almost 30 years ago to help with the founding of the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. So obviously for the last several months, I've been avoiding doing that, and I've decided to hole up in Hong Kong. I live in a wonderful, lovely, rural seaside corner of Hong Kong that is the furthest thing you could imagine from an urban jungle. I have cows walking around my place. And so it's really good for self-isolation. Since Hong Kong's handled it comparatively very well, it's been a really good way to stay, more or less safe-ish. Our hospitals are not overwhelmed. They are, I think, dealing with the after effects of the re-imported cases in the past week or so. I see that there was an article that was shared by who shared this? Ben from Stat News. That I don't know if you've seen
Yes.
about the lesson that, and it says COVID-19's resurgence in Hong Kong holds a lesson, which is that defeating it requires or demands persistence. And I think that while I absolutely believe that that's true, I do think that this analysis is a little bit off base, as with many such articles that I'm seeing. Including in Hong Kong, including even in South China Morning Post, our local top newspaper, because it isn't so much that Hong Kong has let down its guard. The jump during the last week in our cases, and we're for maybe about 6 days, we were seeing a doubling of cases every 2 days. Okay, and so we went from like just over a week ago, less than 200 cases total, after several months of COVID, to now we have over 400 cases, which is kind of a shock. However, what's left out is that most of those cases, the vast majority of those cases, are people from Europe and the US and some other infected regions coming into Hong Kong. And Hong Kong is aggressively testing travelers as they come in. And so is catching a lot of travelers coming in carrying COVID, and those numbers are getting added to the confirmed cases. So the majority of the growth in our cases the last week has not actually come from spreading inside a Hong Kong that has let down its guard. The majority, in contrast, actually, the majority of cases has come from travelers and returnees. And this is why Hong Kong has finally closed its borders to non-residents of Hong Kong. Hong Kong was one of actually the last regions in the world to do that. Hong Kong remained open for longer than almost every other country or region. But the pressure with all of these new cases, more than doubling the number of cases, the political pressure to actually stop that caused Hong Kong finally to ban tourists and non-residents for the time being from coming in. So I just wanted to sort of correct that misperception from the Stat News article and many other articles that are sort of misinterpreting the jump. That said, absolutely agree with the premise that we do need to absolutely be persistent, that this is not going to be something where we tighten our belts for a couple of weeks or even a couple of months and then everybody returns to normal. That doesn't seem to be the case from the modeling that we're looking at now. I am going to be happy to make this very interactive and to take questions and so forth. I can tell you what's going on, but I would love to play you a talk that I gave 3 days ago at an event called BOMA. Did anybody see that? The BOMA talks? I'm seeing just Brad is nodding. Did you watch? You couldn't have watched the entire 20 hours, but did you happen to see my segment? Really? Yeah, okay.
I did. It was, of course, set to go 24 hours and start in New Zealand and end up here in California. So I did only catch what was later on. I do have to mention, by the way, my webcam today is sponsored by Corona Beer. Corona Beer, we just want to tell you that we are nothing to do with the virus. Come down to Mexico and get a beer. Oh, wait, you can't do that. So also brought to you by the Solar Corona, also trying to say that it has nothing to do with any viruses that may be getting us. So we'll go back to our main sponsors. But
Brad,
anyway, the event was pretty good. Singularity University actually did a pretty good event a few days before as well. So people are actually figuring out something about virtual events.
Indeed. How are you doing that? That's brilliant.
Well, there's lots of software that will mix video. This is Prezi, one of the modes of Prezi. So in fact, that's how I'm going to give all my virtual talks, because mixing yourself with the slides is much better than, I mean, this actually didn't really intend for, demoing what you can do, but you can, you can actually have slides and zoom in and talk about.
That's super. So it's basically, it's a virtual camera that you can plug into any software like Zoom.
Exactly. The other thing I've been experimenting with, and yeah, people may be interested, and we can talk about it more later, but I've been experimenting with also using green screen software to mix PowerPoint and other things into yourself, or to green screen yourself and put yourself into your slides. It's so much more personal than what you usually get, which is this little tiny box, and then you see someone's PowerPoint, which is never very exciting.
Absolutely.
I have a question for you, though, by the way, to get to, since you said you want to take those. So at some point, get to the question of not just Hong Kong, but reports that this is a little bit shocking to many people. The Chinese government may not be telling the full truth about the restoration of Hubei. So anyway, that's a question.
I think I'm going to show the video first because there's a few points there. And not having this Prezi software that you're using, you'll see a lower tech approach that I took to the same problem. But okay, I'm going to share the screen to show that video, if that's okay, and ask you to give me, like a thumbs up or something if it's actually working, that you can see do you see the shared screen with the video in it now? All right. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start the playback and just signal me if it's not working for some reason. I think it should work.
Next up, we've got Dekai, AI professor, web translation, AI pioneer, and Google AI Ethics Council member. Dekai, over to you.
Are sick and contagious. Masks are unnecessary. Don't wear masks unless you're medical staff. You need N95 masks to protect yourself. Sip a hot drink every 15 minutes to kill the virus. The coronavirus will remain an Asian problem. We needn't worry. The virus is an escaped Chinese bioweapon. No, it's an escaped American bioweapon. It's the Chinese virus. Chinese eat bats. Misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation are running rampant. Love in the time of coronavirus is scarce, replaced by irrationality, fear, and hatred. The pandemic has been shadowed and increasingly overshadowed by a panicdemic and an infodemic. The AI algorithms that are powering advertising-based news, and social media, and search continue to generate enormous profits. They're profiting by exploiting us humans. Built-in unconscious biases are cognitive biases. These are biases that evolution hardwired into us. The overconfidence effect, the pseudo-certainty effect, ambiguity effect, Dunning-Kruger effect, bias blind spot. Advertising profit is maximized when AIs prey upon our unconscious. Our civilization, our planetary group of humans, have been joined by AIs who are exponentially amplifying our unconscious groupthink bias. The AIs are encouraging disastrous government responses, especially in democracies. And the AIs are amplifying disastrous mass behavior, false senses of security, panic buying, ineffective preventative measures. The AIs are driving disastrous polarization, both unintentionally as well as via political abuse, amplifying conspiracy theories and racism. The AIs are machine learning the same human unconscious biases that are our Achilles heel, all in the name of profit. We're building AIs to track and fight this, and you can help us to map the misinformation flows, the unconscious cognitive biases they're exploiting, because otherwise governments make disastrous mistakes, like believing the coronavirus would remain an Asian problem, so the West need not worry too much. Social media amplified our representativeness heuristic to make wrong predictions from experience of similar events like SARS, MERS, or Ebola, without realizing we were overestimating its ability to predict accurately. Social media fed our present bias, focusing us on immediate payoffs instead of thinking about future trade-offs a couple of months in the future. And without doing this, AIs drive polarization and hatred with memes like Chinese eat bats causing COVID. Chinese don't eat bats. Some wild game likely transmitted the bat virus. And oh, by the way, wild game is widely eaten in most of the world. But profit-seeking AIs learn to exploit our confirmation bias combined with affinity bias, which biases us towards people like ourselves, and selective perception, where our expectations affect perception. Social media drives polarization and hatred by spreading the Chinese virus meme. AI is preying on our empathy gap, We don't call H1N1 swine flu the American virus, even though the CDC says that's where it started. The AI kicks in our defensive attribution bias to blame someone else as the outcome becomes more and more severe. AI is amplifying framing bias, which misleads us to conclusions based on how a situation or issue is narrowly or metaphorically described. It's leaning in on the reiteration effect, making us believe things via repeated exposure so that familiarity overpowers rationality. Politicians abuse information weaponization to deflect blame. As reported in Nature Medicine, it's not an escaped bioweapon, but politicians can abuse AI to amplify hostile attribution bias, making us unconsciously interpret others' behaviors as having hostile intent. They get AI to feed our belief bias so that we'll rationalize their conspiracy theories. Thanks to our continued influence effect, we'll believe previously learned misinformation even after corrections. So that misinformation still influences our inferences. And even worse, AI makes huge profits off of the backfire effect, feeding our unconscious desire when confronted with counter evidence to just double down and strengthen our incorrect beliefs even more. AI propagated misinformation hurts mass behavior. Many of you have read you should sip a hot drink every 15 minutes to wash the virus down and let the stomach acids kill it. You know, sure, staying hydrated is always good, but that does not kill the virus. Colbert called this truthiness. It's the illusory truth effect that makes us believe falsehoods that are easier to process. The same effect is propagating disastrous misinformation that masks are mainly for protecting yourself. But guess what? No, everyone should wear masks to stop their own droplets from coughing, sneezing, talking, from infecting others. Masks are mainly to protect your fellow community. So why are governments still saying masks are unnecessary to avoid using up masks instead of encouraging universal mask wearing? What they're doing is they're feeding our reactance, which makes us resist constraints on our freedom of choice. The fact that some successful universal mask wearing strategies were all in Asia, China, Hong Kong, Singapore, Japan, feeds our reactive devaluation, where we devalue proposals only because they originated with a perceived adversary. It feeds our not invented here bias because this approach was developed outside our group. We cannot afford to keep letting profit-seeking AIs drive means that cause disastrous mass behavior. Mask wearers are not sick and contagious. No, mask wearers are selfish and community conscious. All of us need to pitch in to stop AIs from amplifying our unconscious stereotyping and attribution errors. Please help us to teach our bias-fighting AI. Go to dek.ai/unbiased. Thank you very much.
Oh, that was brilliant, Dekai. Thank you so much for that. Talk about having great visuals with the masks. I mean, what a cultural thing, right, to wear a mask. I remember when being in Japan, people would just wear a mask as soon as they started to cough. And in England, if you wear a mask, you know, people will say, well, are you contagious? Even though you're protecting, you know, them from yourself. Right.
I see you clapping. I don't hear it, but thank you. So a lot of that message synthesized, of course, you know, my work really on the AI and information disorder problem with misinformation and malinformation, disinformation, but really was driven by the experience of how we've been tackling the coronavirus here in Hong Kong. And I'm actually working with a group of people to really try to shift the policymaker decisions on this right now. It is of great dismay to me that both in Europe and in the US, we see one after the other policy analyses and policy briefings and things like that, you know, charts that look like this, comparing different measures to tackle the coronavirus. And not one of them lists universal mask wearing as one of the possible policies to take. Every successful place, Hong Kong included, has controlled, suppressed the spread of coronavirus through 99% of the population wearing masks all over the place all the time, and thus helping to slow the spread through droplets that are emitted when you're talking, when you're coughing and you're sneezing. I think that is something that isn't getting through. I've had a lot of discussions with people who are working on those policy documents, and they list all sorts of far more expensive measures, measures that cost way more than that. And yet, even though we're spending enormous amounts per person, people aren't considering these simple measures of just having masks, and these can be they can be homemade masks, right? You often hear shortages of masks as being an excuse for this, but you can make masks out of old T-shirts that are almost as good as your surgical mask, or actually are competitive with surgical masks. Everyone could be making these and wearing them and washing them, reusing them. There's absolutely no excuse for this policy measure against the coronavirus. It is a mindset thing. There is no culture of actually wearing the masks, and I think that is a big part of why we can't get this to be adopted. So we are actually right now writing papers, academic, on where in the world there has been universal mask wearing and where there hasn't been, the history and so forth, because we really need to get that implemented as quickly as possible to slow the spread out in Europe and the US and the rest of the developing world as well. Am I coming through okay? All of you are now muted, so I have no idea whether
You got choppy for a
what the
second.
reaction is.
Loud and clear.
I hear you well. I just as a default
Okay.
don't have my video on just to save bandwidth over here because I'm in isolation in the woods. But I'm definitely here. I'm definitely hearing everything you're saying. And in fact, I'm wondering whether the paper that you just referred to is the paper that we very briefly discussed at the AI meeting too, where you'd like to make a case, or like just actually compare numbers between mask wearing and not mask wearing countries, and like droplet spread. Is that the one?
Not sure. If you could send it to me either now or later, I'll let you know. There are a few papers, but the papers I'm referring to are actually much more in depth. So we have a collection of papers of that type. Please do send the one that you're talking about, and I'll let you know what we figured out on that. I'm just looking at the group chat here. Moisture accumulation that provides a for the virus. Yes, so this is so exactly the type of bias in the conversation that we've seen in Europe and the US has entirely been around how does this mask protect myself, right? And so in terms of the moisture accumulation and so forth, the framing of that has all been, oh, your mask is going to actually trap the virus and provide a breeding ground, and it's going to be bad for yourself. And again, that isn't the purpose of universal mask wearing. It's to actually prevent the spread, right? And you wear it when you go out. Sure, some stuff will accumulate on it when you get home and you wash it, right? And you have a couple of them, so you, or if you have a stash of mask, you do that too. It's not really, again, primarily to protect yourself. It's more about, so like right now, most of you are probably under lockdown or self-isolation. And think of this as this is a nose and mouth lockdown rather than locking down your entire body inside your apartment or your home, right? Wouldn't it be far easier to deal with this for 18 months if we would all lock down our noses and our mouths instead of all of ourselves inside? Like, I don't know how many of you want to be in your apartment for 18 months. I'm still looking at the chat for the questions. Not sure I understand the questions there. But yeah, as Allison says, feel free to just unmute yourself and jump in with questions as well. I'll give you a chance to do that.
Hi.
We had one.
Your city had a big stimulus, a $10,000 per person stimulus as a direct result of this. How do you think that's affected life there?
So we've had a payout like that once before with the crisis, the financial crisis. It is not, you know, people like to cite it as you know, like, is UBI finally coming? It's a one payment. And 10,000 Hong Kong is about 1250 US, 1,250 or, you know, 1,300 max. So, you know, it's not make or break for most of us by any means, but for the bottom 50%, because Hong Kong does have a very stratified economics, you know, the Gini coefficient's quite high. So for the bottom 50+%, that is a significant chunk of a monthly salary. And it's a one-off. The government tends to do that here because, you know, Hong Kong is one of the freest economies in the world. It's very free market oriented. The government is typically helpless. They don't know what to do with their money. And so like all they can think of doing is, oh, let's give people some money.
Do you think that if this hadn't come, the corona hadn't come on the heels of the series of protest actions and so forth, that still would have taken place?
Yeah, I think they would have done that anyway. As I mentioned, they did something like this once before with the financial crisis. It is a way of thinking.
Hey, so let's
a good way.
It's
how can you make mask wearing a norm?
Potentially a good way, but the questions that people are asking are, could there be a more organized way to send the money into the system? Or, you know, is there a way that they could apply the money in ways that would help tackle the coronavirus, or tackle the housing problems, or tackle the fact that the landlords make off with the vast majority of the annual GDP?
Do you think that this state of rent control and housing as a civil right is reasonably to your liking in Hong Kong?
Sorry, the state of what?
Rent control. Something you alluded to a moment ago.
No. So one of the biggest social problems we have in Hong Kong, unrelated to the coronavirus, is a problem that real estate is outrageously through the roof. You know, people talk about that being a problem in San Francisco. Well, guess what? It's far, far worse in Hong Kong. Not only are property prices higher in Hong Kong than San Francisco, but, you know, like, again, median salaries are far lower. Average salaries maybe are comparable, but because of our very high inequality, that means that the median is much lower. And so you have a huge number of people who are working crazy amounts to barely be able to have, you know, a roof over a 3-generation family, all crammed into tiny 600 square foot apartments, if they're lucky. So I think that, you know, and rent control really exists primarily through only in government subsidized housing, what we would call the projects in the US. So that does not help the majority of the population.
All right, does anyone have a question right away? I see 2 hands raised. Brian, here, you have your hand raised.
Yes, so the question is, how can we make mask wearing the norm? Because it seems like we need to like make the norm that people actually when you're going outside, you want to protect other people, right? So
can I ask you right back?
Yeah.
Brian, you are in Nairobi, is that correct?
Yes.
And how is it there? Are people wearing masks there at all?
No, well, very few. And what I see is the staff. So people who interact with a lot of people, like the main form of transportation in Nairobi is the public transportation. So they're called matatus here. Just buses, sometimes 14-seater buses, sometimes 70-seater buses, 40-seater buses as well. So people are wearing, the people who are most likely wearing masks are the drivers and the touts, and they also try and spread they have the sanitizers there in the vehicle themselves. So when people are paying, so when people actually enter in the vehicle, it's different. But the problem is people haven't normalized paying using mobile money, M-Pesa, which is like the default payment method, except in matatus. I don't know why people just default to using coins and cash. So there's a vector right there. There's the touts themselves have sometimes they may be tired or something, so they keep on taking off the mask. So, but I don't know how much it destroys the norm of protecting other people, because they'll also receive money from other people. So that seems like another vector for super spreaders in a way, because you can actually spread in that way. I don't know how the measurement of I don't know how the testing has taken into account that in what's being described in the news and in the public information that we see right now, what we're seeing in the media and what the reports are from the Kenya health authorities. So we just have to keep paying attention. So there's so many self-reporting sources as well. Last time, in the last, I think on Monday, the first time I was in this community, I shared a link to a survey that people are doing in Nairobi, but it's actually spread globally now. So I think I can share it, and then you guys can participate in submitting some of this information. So this is from this link I'm posting right now is from Nairobi. This is basically like a consortium of Kenya's private sector. So they funded this project, and it's being supported by Ushahidi, which I talked about as a crowdsourcing community. So people are giving their self-reports on what it looks like there. And it's pretty detailed even within Nairobi itself. So you can get a pretty good idea of what people are doing and how they're reacting to this. Yeah. So I think my real question is how can we make mask wearing the norm? Like it needs to be a meme, right? Like wearing masks should be the thing that you strive to do because you're actually trying to go out and live your life. We shouldn't let this destroy our hopes and dreams. Like we can actually do whatever it is we need to do when we're out there, as long as we are proud of the thing we're trying to do, which is to protect other people. That's the thing we should be proud of. We should be making other people proud of as well.
Kai, do you have any idea on how to make mask wearing a norm? And I'm especially interested, maybe especially given the Hong Kong protests before and the role of mask wearing there. And do you think that had any influence in people's kind of like tipping into wearing masks or not?
I really don't think so. Again, the universal mask wearing was already deeply ingrained as a response to epidemics in Hong Kong, and not only in Hong Kong, but throughout, Hong Kong, China, Taiwan, Japan, Korea, the places that got hit so hard by SARS. So I really don't think so. Hong Kong society has been and certainly by no means was all of Hong Kong on the protest side. There was a significant percentage that are not on the pro side, and yet when the coronavirus hit, everybody's saying it really is not I don't think a factor at all. In terms of how to shift that culture, I think it is really important to move away from the stigma that is attached to mask wearers in Europe, in the US, and many other parts where people who wear masks are seen somehow as a negative. And particularly now there's actually, because of some of what I alluded to in the video, you know, Asians who are wearing masks have been, you know, getting beaten up and so forth. And that is not a way to inspire people to get into the mask wearing mode. There's a suggestion from David that maybe I go to audio because my bandwidth maybe is low. Should I do that?
You are kind of choppy on the audio. I'm not sure if it's your bandwidth.
I'm not sure it's gonna, well, okay, we'll see how you sound now.
I'm gonna go ahead and stop the video and see if that helps. And please give me a signal if it does help. If the, so removing the stigma is important, and I think means that actually encourage you to wear a mask is super important. There are a lot of effective memes going around right now on other issues. I think we're looking at creating memes for the mask wearing issue. One of the things that is a very strong thing in Hong Kong, for example, right now, if I walk into town and I'm not wearing a mask, I'm going to get a lot of super dirty looks and probably some verbal abuse as well. It is a matter of shame not to be doing your part to help save the society. And I think that is something that we need to blanket mass communications with. It is a part of one's responsibility to society to protect the rest of your community. And so we're seeking help. If you go to that website that I was mentioning in the video, it's dek.ai/unbias. We've actually set up a simple system that will allow people to type in memes and sources of those memes and the types of cognitive biases that apply there. Now, of course, most of those are disinformation, misinformation type of memes, but we also are looking for memes that are helpful and get people to recognize what might be a responsibility that they're not thinking about right now.
I mean, you did have it, mask wearing, you did have it at least see, like I saw some of it on runways. I don't know whether it was Gucci, because someone in the chat just suggested it, you should have a Gucci brand or like a Gucci campaign with just mask wearing folks. But there were definitely a few fashion shows already out there that kind of like had fancy masks. I think maybe one was Magella. I'm not sure, but so at least it like simmered there. It's slowly simmered through there. So maybe just make them really fancy and pretty. I don't know, like what are the types of masks that people in Hong Kong are wearing? Are they all just white, or have people made their own, or like is it already kind of like sunken into the culture, and are people already trying to like individuate themselves by having fancier masks than others, or how was the situation?
There are actually masks that are a little bit more decorated as sort of homemade masks that have interesting patterns, fabrics. The vast majority are just wearing normal surgical masks. We no longer have a shortage of those in Hong Kong. They do cost 2 or 3 times what they normally cost, but we do have masks coming in. I think during the fires that we were having in California a couple of times in the last year or two, you also saw people wearing a lot of masks. So, you know, the last one that was really bad that ended up with smoke all over even Berkeley, a lot of people were actually wearing masks to protect themselves, not to protect the community. But those masks were getting highly individuated already. People were making fashion statements out of them, and I think that is it is definitely one of the components that we've been considering on how to get the people to actually do this. So we are definitely open to, like, and if anybody wants to help us on this project, please let us know, because I think it's one of the cheapest things that we can do to massively reduce the costs, both economically and in lives, of the damage from coronavirus.
It's actually kind of strange. So there's been a reversal, as we know. In the past, Asian people would wear a mask if they were feeling a cold, and a mask was a symbol that, in fact, you were possibly contagious and you were protecting the community. But it quickly shifted to being everyone wearing a mask, whether you were contagious or not. And if you took a mask as saying I'm contagious, you'd be scared to death. And in fact, in January, one of the last times I got on a plane, everyone on the plane coming off, this was in Budapest, was where it was from Chinese and wearing a mask. And the Westerners freaked, of course. They thought, my God, are all these people coming from China and they're all infected? And so it's pretty hard to sort of shift from what it used to mean to what we now want it to mean.
Anna, you had a question?
Sorry, really choppy.
Was I choppy?
A little.
Hey, I just want to ask a question, actually two. I got a cough yesterday, and I'm fairly sure it's not a virus. You know, I did a probabilistic analysis, and like, it's unlikely because I've been away from major crowds, etc., for most of the past month. But at the same time, there's this lingering doubt at the back of your head. And I'm wondering, if it's possible to create some kind of expert system that can help people take either a quiz or like enter the temperature or something, or just track it to see if they should go in to get tested. Because even though I can afford to pay more and get tested anyway, it would not be ethical of me to do so, Question number two is essentially, can we create something to track the spread above and beyond, like a heuristic method to do so, above and beyond what testing is telling us? Because if you are looking at mortality as lagging indicator of how many people might be infected, then there might be more than 1 million people to 2 million people in the US already. And that's really scary. I feel like it might help to put all the numbers into perspective if people weren't just looking at the official tally of how many people have been diagnosed as such versus a tally of how many possible patients there could be in the total community. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think they're both excellent points, and I have friends who are working on these points. The latter one, I'm actually somewhat involved in, so we are actually looking at modeling these spreads in order to make it more concrete for people how this affects the projected mortality rates. I'm sort of like leaving space for people to ask questions and also trying to catch up with the questions on the group chat. So, but please speak up if you have a question.
I will, Dekai, I will catch you up with the questions on the group chat, okay? So I would just say, and I will also try to take raised hands that I see around here. And I think someone who's had their hands up for a while was Leslie.
Yeah, I'm getting conflicting informations, what type of location technologies and contact tracing methods are used in different countries in Southeast Asia. And yeah, I was just wondering if you have any information about it, because what the media is generally saying about China and other countries is that they are using some sort of GPS, or it sounded like absolute location triangulation solutions, which I would believe are highly inaccurate and incomplete. Singapore was reported of using some sort of Bluetooth, which is very important because we are not really interested in where exactly the guy is. What we are interested in is where the other people were around him and when. So who were the people who were within 2 meters or 6 feet distance from the subject who finally got diagnosed? So if they can just build a linked list of all of those contacts that Bluetooth detects, then finally when the guy gets diagnosed, then they can just walk through and walk through the list and make a determination that who were the most likely previous host of the infection. So it's almost intuitively obvious that that's the most accurate and the fastest way of getting to the root of the source of the problem. So you could save enormous time and the maximum slowdown in the escalation of the infection is this type of digital nomadic computing ad hoc networks, because you don't have to go back to the server, to the central station where everything is managed. I've been wondering for weeks that why this issue is not addressed. I mean, the technology itself is half a century old. They used to be called ad hoc nomadic networks. And the last 25 years, it's a customary consumer technology in every mobile gadget. You can buy a Bluetooth chip for 25 cents. So I was just wondering if, since you are in the academia in computer science and computer engineering, you might have got some insight that what's really going on in deploying those networks. Because right now here in the US, the only way of contact tracing is that you should get locked up in your bedroom and period. So and if someone gets sick and diagnosed, then they might interview the guy. Okay, so where have you been in the last 14 years? Good luck, right? So do you have any insight on this, DK?
Yeah, so I'll give a couple of data points. So like in Hong Kong, nothing was used technologically. They did the contact tracing the good old-fashioned way. This works when you've gotten in early, and as Hong Kong did, and you have aggressive, as soon as you detect a case, the system is not overwhelmed, and you send in people to, you send in humans to actually literally find out where did you go, who did you come in contact with, and just, hoof it around into the various places and trace that all through manually. And that's what Hong Kong did. And has been actually quite effective in Hong Kong because it got there early. Now, I think that if you are late to the game, as unfortunately Europe and the US and the rest of the world have been, in spite of 2-3 months extra of early warning, once that mistake has been made, then you're beyond where you can do it with this old-fashioned human way. And that's when the technology sort of is your only choice. Like, so either you go the way that the UK apparently started going, which is we're just going to take it on the chin and let everybody get infected, and we're going to, you know, have a lot of deaths, unfortunately. Or you go, the opposite is, you know, sort of the Chinese approach, which is we are going to invest in technology of all kinds to trace. So it's not only necessarily location tracking based on GPS and combination of Bluetooth and other mesh technologies, but also all sorts of other things, you know, fusing data from everything, from cameras to electronic payments systems and everything else, right? And so that's, yeah, so that's obviously, you know, the opposite end of the spectrum. And then in between, you have things like Korea, where there are a lot of different groups, startups or organizations, and they each compete, they each create competing apps that are supposed to warn people if they are near potential infectors. So there's an incentive for people to load their those apps on their phone so that they get warning, oh, you should stay away from this person or whatever. But you know, the problem with that approach is that you ended up with a whole lot of different competing apps that weren't sharing information because of commercial whatever concerns, and so like it's a far less effective approach. And so then you get into a whole bunch of just sort of more ideological debates between people about how much emergency surveillance they are willing to adopt. Basically, how many people are you willing to kill in exchange for your privacy?
Yeah, I agree.
Right.
This one works as everyone is doing, or maybe in a community.
I'm willing to kill lots of people in exchange for my privacy if you can't promise me that the surveillance will stop when it's over. And unfortunately, the trend has been emergency measures don't stop.
Well, you built it in the application or in the gadget. Okay, you can, when it's over, they disconnect it.
Yeah, that's what they say they'll do.
Or you can disconnect it. Leave a customer a subject controlled switch on it. You can turn it off if you want. It just everyone will see that you turned it off. So
I wish I shared your adorable enthusiasm.
So there are a lot of different approaches, and different societies, different cultures obviously are making different choices. You know, I think what we see is that people's choices also vary greatly if the people that are about to be killed are their own children or their own parents, rather than some anonymous person on the other side of the world. And so I think we're seeing each of the regions making their own choices on this.
I share Brett's concern.
Another question.
Oops.
No, you go, Jennifer. Please go for it.
I was just saying that I share Brad's concern about the time frame of anything that we accept as extraordinary measures during this time. President Trump defined this time as 15 days, and we'll see, but it is likely to be 12 to 18 months, in my understanding, before substantial change happens to the need to shelter in place and the need to track cases. And people have short memories and may accept as the new normal whatever evolves during that time.
Yeah, well, look at how long, you know, we kept the Patriot Act alive after 9/11.
Yeah, still counting. So the question I asked at the beginning, Kai, the situation on the ground in China and in Hubei, you are presumably closer to that than many people are here. So are the reports, of course, the official line is there are no new cases. Many people are wondering if that's true.
I think that is true or close to true. You know, I think I've seen all the conspiracy theory posts. You know, if I...
Oh, you haven't seen all of them.
Well, okay. Natural language, Brad, works figuratively. We have, you know, it is easy to believe conspiracy theories like that if you are not connected to those populations. But obviously, as you say, in this part of the world, there are a huge number of people who came from there, maybe, amongst even my faculty colleagues, right? A huge number who came from there, people who are there, people right now who are there, even who are in my classes, and who are one of my TAs is literally in Hubei, because we're teaching by Zoom, so everything, like people are scattered. You can't keep this kind of thing secret. If people's, parents died, or their children or spouse died with any sort of significant frequency, this stuff leaks. This picture of China as absolute information control could not be further from the truth. The social media and so forth is extremely active, and only the most egregious cases actually get censored by the authorities. They cannot keep these things secret, and they don't. It always gets out. So, okay, there might be 1 or 2 new cases or whatever, but it's certainly not a massive number of new cases.
All right, thank you. Is there anyone here who hasn't asked a question yet who would like to go? Anyone who has asked a question that would like to go?
I had a continuation.
Yeah, great.
I had a continuation, I think, of Brad's question. This event has been described, this COVID outbreak has been described as something on par with 9/11, or even the ripple effects of the Second World War, conceivably. We've described some of those institutions. Is there anything else you see, if you're in the prediction business, on the horizon for Hong Kong or mainland China in response to this, Professor Kai?
I think those are 2 very different cases, mainland China and Hong Kong. In China, I think that, I know that there is a great deal of, let me say several things. One, there was a great deal of outrage over the suppression of the doctor who initially tried to warn about the coming virus, and subsequently actually died from that virus, ironically, and tragically. Really a lot of discussion on transparency and so forth. At the same time, there's also enormous support thereafter for the central government's approach toward tackling the crisis. So now bear in mind that the people who suppressed the initial attempts at warning about the coronavirus was not the central government. It was provincial bureaucrats, officials at the Hubei level, who have subsequently been fired and punished. And they certainly effed up. There's no getting around that. That said, which of our governments has not got mid-level government officials who are effing up all the time? In our, in the U.S., it's not even mid-level. Our top-level government officials have made massive mess of things. The central government, once they actually got through the attempts at hiding the problems at the provincial level, took very definitive action very strongly. It was very harsh, it was very hard, but the population of China is massively behind what they did. And is actually, we're in all sorts of discussion groups on this. I think, Brad, you're also on the discussion group, for example, with Haisong. Is that right? No? Okay. There's a tremendous amount of pride in how strongly, in a unified way, in a way that was thinking for the society as a whole, and not just only individuals, were able to everybody contribute their part hard as it was to actually facing down the crisis. And so I would say, from my best estimate, that there will be scandals about the whistleblowing. There will be a lot of post-mortems on how do we prevent this from happening again, because post-SARS, China had already instituted measures that were designed to prevent mid-level people from trying to suppress dangers like SARS. And they clearly didn't work. People were still at the mid-level disincentivized from letting the information out. And so there is going to be both public and internal government postmortems on how to fix that problem. But as the entire country goes, I would say the Chinese government is, aside from that transparency issue, is probably going to come out stronger because of the decisive way that they tackled it. Hong Kong, it's hard. Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Go for it. Go for it.
Hong Kong, it's difficult to say because we still don't know whether the more than doubling of cases this last week is just, you know, temporary while we're still taking in the many returnees from the West. That's bumping up the counts because we're testing all of them, or whether it is really going to lead to another exponential spread rather than just a contained increase in the number of cases.
Yeah, we had some discussion on just very quickly on the point that Kai just mentioned. We had some discussion on this at the previous meeting with Alex Gladstein from the Human Rights Foundation and Matt Bell, and the videos I think are going to be online today on authoritarianism and COVID-19. And I think Mark, Christine, and I are going to do a session on that, on top-down versus decentralized approaches to crisis response on Sunday evening at 6 p.m. PT. If people want to join, Dekai, we would certainly love to have you there and to have your feedback there, because I think, you know, there's a question of, you know, whether the U.S. government versus the Chinese government would be better at handling it. We're seeing that currently quite prevalently, but then there's also, you know, kind of like what openness do you give to community response and community resilience and to the flow of open information, and how could have that affected like a better outcome. So I would welcome you to join that session to give us like a little bit of info from on the ground. But I don't want to take away further from, please tell me how I pronounce your name.
Oh, it's Toma, but it's Holmendorf.
Toma. Okay,
Yes.
Toma. I'll go with Toma. Thank you for joining again. It's really nice to see you again. What's your question? And we are 4 minutes over time, so this will be the last question. Okay, great.
Dekai, have you seen a notice in return to manufacturing or people returning into the supply chain industries at all in Hong Kong or in China?
Yes, we don't have very much manufacturing in Hong Kong anymore. There are a lot of startups in making masks and hand sanitizers locally. But I think in China, there is definitely attempts to, you know, start getting the economy going again. I do think that they have had to sort of try and then pull back, and it's very, very regional. There are certainly regions where they're not doing that yet, a lot of them. I think one of the after effects of this whole thing, this ties into the previous question again, is that this is extremely likely, in my opinion, to accelerate greatly what was already happening in mainland China, which is to transform China's economy to be far, far, far more heavily, predominantly domestic consumption driven rather than export driven. It's been pointed out that even as China is beginning to restart its manufacturing and economic engines, that it is now faced with a double whammy that on the, while it gets its supply side going again, the demand side, where it was exporting to the US, to Europe, the rest of the world, is only now being hit by the coronavirus. And so they have, you know, not much place to sell to. other than emergency supplies for the coronavirus. And so that means that China, if it wants to get the economy going again, has to sell within China. And this has been an economic move that China has been trying to do for a long time, right? Because as China has become economically more developed, it's unsustainable for it to continue to be entirely low-cost export-driven. And until the coronavirus hit, China's native population was actually becoming more and more consumption-driven and enjoying the benefits of the products that were being made in China, which are, of course, are of increasingly high quality.
Thank you so much, Dekai. I'll put my video on just to say goodbye to you all and to really, really thank you for taking the time. I know it's very late for you. Thank you for staying up for us. Thank you for kind of like feeding us some kind of like on the ground research. I think I would really love for you if you, I think there was one request from Jennifer from the group, if you have any research on mask wearing, how that relates to protecting others. If you could share those papers, that would be great. Secondly, please share anything with me that I can put in the notes section of the spreadsheet of the schedule, where people can get involved and where people could help with kind of like the mask meme effort. And then, yeah, do you have any final words that you want to say, or how could people find out? There's also the dek.ai/unbiased website that you'd like to maybe share, right? Anything else that I'm missing?
Yes, that site is up and running, but it's the user interface is undergoing some redesign because we just got it up in one day, basically. It's very, very deep in terms of, I mean, there's literally like hundreds of unconscious cognitive biases listed there. We're going to simplify, streamline, but it's already usable to help input both ideas for good means to promote things like mask wearing and social responsibility en masse, but also for the downside, right? So like in our free societies with transparency and freedom of information, as we've seen, the problem that we also have to face and figure out solutions to is that it equally propagates misinformation and disinformation. So like cataloging those things right now is what we're using to help teach AIs to help fight the effect of how social media and so forth are preying upon our unconscious cognitive biases, right? That's a problem I think we have to really solve. It's very insidious because by definition, these are unconscious biases. So you're not aware 90% of the time that that's why that meme or that message is actually resonating with you. And so we have to get people to be more aware if we're going to be able to save our democratic systems. And the coronavirus right now, it's even more important because it is causing the populations to do the wrong thing. It's causing government policy makers to come to the wrong decisions. And everybody is just trapped sort of in groupthink because everybody is thinking the same thing because that's what they keep hearing all day long, driven by these echo chambers.
Yeah, I agree. I think sometimes it's even worse. Sometimes it's not really that people are thinking in groupthink, but sometimes it's even more frustrating if people update at different times. So people take it seriously, then they don't anymore. Then others start taking it seriously because they're subjected kind of like to different news sources. They're also conflicting things. And so I think even like the opposite of the groupthink, this kind of like slow updating, which never really coordinates people to actually have the info that they should be seeking is also something to be wary of. So please share us all of the resources that you have, and I will share them to the Google Doc. From my end, I will share with everyone now what I would love for people and what I would love help with. I would be really grateful if you could point me to people who have COVID-19 projects that are in need of support and would benefit from exposure in this salon. If you know other people who can benefit others by making sense of the situation or pointing positive ways out, or if someone just if people have talents for making people safe and cared for, we will also maybe do a salon on that because I'm seeing a lot of demand for that. With that being said, thank you so much, Dekai. I'm hoping to see much more.
You. I hope to see many of you in person soon. Tony, you're there. Great to see you too. Great to see you, Brad. Beyond, as always, and look forward to a time past the coronavirus where we can all get together in person and celebrate.
Yeah.
Be safe.
Yeah, and hug each other again. Thank you so much for joining. Oh, one last thing. Today later at 6 p.m. we have one session that is on the home treatment of COVID-19 with cinchona alkaloids and the evidence for the antiviral efficacy of quinine by Patrick Meller, who's a Foresight Fellow, and who will share some brand new kind of like self-tests and discoveries that he's made. So if you're interested in joining that, and if you're interested in like a home treatment on COVID, in case you should get it, then please join tonight at 6 p.m. And yeah, I hope to see many of you there. Love you all. See you soon. Bye-bye. Thank you, Dekai.